Hey everyone. So we are in the middle of February, almost, and now is the perfect time to start pruning your ornamental garden trees. We're going to prune them in their dormant state to get them to grow into the shapes and forms that we want them to grow in over the coming season. And this goes for deciduous trees, shrubs, and evergreen trees. I'm going to show you everything you need to know to get your trees to grow to a manageable height and into the shape that you want them to grow in this year. So why do we prune our trees in winter? Now the best time to do them is when they're dormant and before they're bursting into growth for the new season. So late winter and early spring is the best time to do it, and especially for ornamental garden trees, because it's a time where the garden's sort of stripped back to its bare bones and we can see what shape and size we want to grow them to over the coming season. Pruning them now means that all of your garden trees stay a manageable size and you can keep on top of everything and keep everything to scale in your garden and keep the neighbours happy without blocking anybody's light. Now at this time of year, trees like this deciduous tree don't have much on them to look at other than one key feature. It's buds, and the buds are what we're going to use to guide us for late winter and early spring pruning, because we can steer growth hormones to certain buds to get trees and shrubs to grow into the shape and size that we want. So I'll grab the camera and I'll show you a close-up of some of the techniques I'm going to use for pruning my garden trees in spring and late winter. Now this deciduous tree is my golden Indian bean tree. Its Latin name is Catalpa bignonioides aurea. And it's deciduous, so it loses all of its leaves in winter. Any winter storms shake off any dead wood, and now's the perfect time to see the bare bones of the plant and prune it to the shape that you want. Now the buds that we're going to use are these buds that grow along the stems here. And we can steer growth hormones to certain buds. Now with this golden Indian bean tree, this has been grafted onto a dwarfing rootstock, so it's not a vigorous grower, not as much as it would have been on its own rootstock, which is good. It means it keeps it manageable, but I can still prune to get the plant to grow into the shape that I want. So we're going to utilise these buds, and I'll grab my pair of secateurs now. Now there are two types of bud formations when you're pruning. You get opposite buds like this and alternate bud formations, and that's going to dictate how you prune your garden trees. Now with opposite buds, you're just going to want to do a straight cut across the top, and that's going to prevent water sitting on either of the buds. If it's alternate buds, you will have a bud on this side here, and the next node will have a bud on this side. So as you're pruning, you just prune with the angle away from the bud, and that means any water runoff will run away from the bud and help prevent rot and encourage healthy new growth. So by pruning these tip growth down, it's called a heading cut, because you're removing what's called the terminal bud. That's the bud at the very tip of the growing stem, which is where all of the growth hormones are naturally going to go. By removing that bud, you're going to encourage side shoots from the buds further down the stem. So I'm just going to do that here, and remember, because I've got opposite buds, I'm going to cut flat across the two, just like that. And again here, and here. And that's brought most of this branch down to a sensible height, ready for the coming year's growth. Now, if I was to be cutting branches that are going sideways in a direction I didn't want, and cutting them right back to the collar, that would be called a thinning cut rather than a heading cut, because I'm thinning out the branches and I'm getting the shape that I want in the plant. Now, I'll show you in a close-up what a thinning cut would look like and how you can best get a cut to kind of decrease the chances of disease getting into your plant and helping it stay as healthy as possible. So this branch here is growing into the crown of my tree, and I'm only wanting to encourage buds that are growing outward to keep it nice and healthy and aerated. So we're going to remove this branch. So we're going to do what's called a thinning cut, where we're going to take it right back to the collar here. Now the collar is this section where the side branch joins the other branch of the tree. And if we cut it right back into there, it's going to encourage disease and rot into this scar that will form. By leaving the collar, you're going to encourage the tree to heal in a much more healthy way. And you see there's a bud there. I'm going to cut just behind the bud, because if I didn't, that bud would continue to grow and we'd get more growth in this direction, which we don't want. So now we've cut it back, we've left the collar so that this can heal over, and stop disease getting into the tree, and there's no buds, so nothing's going to grow in this direction anymore. And while we're here, we've got a bit of dead wood here, so we're just going to cut that back as well, again just to the collar, and we're good to go. We've removed the horizontal growth that we don't want using a thinning cut. We've removed dead wood, and we've done a header cut here, or a heading cut, removing the terminal bud and encouraging side shoots to come from these auxiliary buds. And it's just a way of sort of looking into your crystal ball, deciding how you want the future to go, because you can steer trees in the direction you want. It's not something that you plant into your garden and it's going to take over, which is what a lot of people think when they're planting trees in small gardens. You can manage it very, very easily just following these steps. So I'm going to get stuck in now and bring the rest of the height down. Now, although it might look drastic cutting this much off of your tree, especially when you're in a small garden and you really are proud of kind of the foliage that you've grown, it isn't. Pruning this way, as I say, is going to stimulate growth in the direction that we want. And with some trees, like this one, this golden Indian bean tree, it's going to encourage bigger foliage. Now, other trees that you could grow that hard pruning encourages bigger foliage is something like Paulownia fortunei, which is the foxglove tree. And that will grow leaves kind of this sort of size. If you hard prune it every single year down to a single stem, it will branch out and produce enormous leaves, which look great in a tropical style garden. Now I'm going to continue around and we'll start working on an evergreen tree. So this tree behind me is my evergreen loquat tree. It's a great tree for tropical looking evergreen foliage, and it's very, very tough and hardy, but they are quite vigorous growers, so they do need pruning. Now the best time to do these, as with many evergreens, is before they burst into growth in spring. And because we've had quite a mild winter on the whole, there have been some cold nights, but because it's been generally quite mild, this loquat has started growing quite a bit earlier than I expected, so I'm a little bit behind for pruning. So now, even though it started, is a good time to come out and prune it, just to encourage any growth hormones that are kind of flowing up and down these stems and through the buds to grow in the direction that we want. Now, because this has grown a little bit too tall, we're going to do some header or heading pruning to reduce the height and get it to branch out at a lower size, and some thinning pruning because it's got quite dense here, and I want to open it up and let the airflow go through, because although this year it has had a couple of flowering stems in winter which could have set fruit in spring, I'm not primarily growing it for the fruit. So I don't mind pruning it and cutting off some flowers. But in the coming years, if I've got it opened up a bit more, those flowers are going to be seen by pollinators. And if we have a mild winter, I might be lucky enough to have it set fruit. So again, like I say, I'm looking into that crystal ball, I'm planning for the future and making my cuts now to get this tree to do what I want it to do in the future. And like I say, this is a vigorous tree. So many people would be scared of planting something like this in a small garden, but stay on top of the pruning. I'm not on a ladder, I haven't got any fancy tools, just a pair of secateurs. I'm about 6 foot tall, and it just keeps it at a manageable height and makes it a really easy 5-minute job to do once a year, maybe twice if I do a bit of pruning in late summer just to keep the size manageable, but it keeps it so much easier. So with the loquat, we can see that we've got those alternate buds that I was talking about. So the golden Indian bean tree had opposite buds on either side of the stem, and this one produces buds alternately going down the stem. So we're going to prune on an angle away from one of the buds to encourage water to flow away and to keep all of our cuts nice and healthy and give them the best chance of healing over with no disease or infections. Again, although it might look drastic trying to cut this much off, when we spent so long trying to grow plants in our garden, we know how much they grow in a season, so we can cut roughly that amount off to maintain a size once the plants have got to the shape and size that we want, which is what we're doing here. Not so much steering it to do what we want in the future, but keeping it at this size and keeping it nice and open. I'm just going to keep going, pruning it back, and each cut I do at the tip is also going to encourage more bushy growth, so it's more of this foliage and potentially more flowering and fruiting stems in the future. And there we go, with what looks like a drastic amount cut off. It doesn't always have to be that severe. The plant is ready to grow for the coming season, and I know that which direction the buds are going to grow in because I've pruned to a bud on the right side of the plant to encourage it to grow in that direction, to open up the centre, or to bring down the height and encourage bushier growth. And you too can keep on top of the trees and shrubs in your garden by pruning them the same way. Now just double check if you're growing trees or shrubs for fruit or flowers. Double check the specific pruning needs for those, because you don't want to be cutting them back in spring if they're going to flower on the wood that you're cutting off. So always double check, but as a general rule, these tips for pruning ornamental shrubs and trees will apply to most gardens. Now hopefully you found this video useful, and if you did, hit that subscribe button, and if you're in the UK, feel free to check out our plant and seed shop where we deliver plants and seeds for tropical style gardens, exotic gardens, to addresses all over the UK, including Northern Ireland. Thank you so much for watching, thank you for your support, and I'll see you all in the next one.